Hello and welcome to what is probably going to be my last official video of 2023. Now, there is another video that I'm working on, but I don't think it's going to be done by the end of 2023. So for all intents and purposes, this is my last video of 2023 because December's video will not be filmed until January. But I thought it would be fun to kind of go through and list like my top 10 books/series that I read in 2023. Maybe not like the best, but my favorites. Now, I will say there are some rereads on this list. It's not all new books, but I elected to leave off certain books, such as The Scorpio Races, and only include rereads if I feel like I was rediscovering them. If I had gone a significant amount of time without reading them, and they maybe weren't like my favorite book series before, but now they're, I think, one of my favorites that I read this year. Of course, because of that, Gideon the Ninth and The Scorpio Races, etc., they have not made this list, but they are, in fact, some of my favorite books and some of the best that I read. It didn't feel fair to put them on this list. And I also did not want to give you guys an entire video that's just like books that I've already talked about. Now, there are going to be books that I've already talked about on this list, but I have assembled a list of my top 10 favorites that I've read this year. Some of them you have already heard about, some of them you haven't. But before we get into that, I actually wanted to list some of my honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. Those would be the Five Kingdoms series by Brandon Mull, which I dearly love but could not quite make this list. The Unicorn Chronicles by Bruce Coville, which I talked about briefly, but I feel like as more time has passed, I have grown to appreciate them even more, and I kind of want to go back and revisit them now. And I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, which is definitely not like those other two. I enjoyed the documentary series a lot, but it wasn't quite enough to make this list. That being said, I also almost put Dragon Watch on this list, also by Brandon Mull, but I ultimately decided not to because at the time of filming this video, I have not finished reading the series. I'm like 90% sure that I'm gonna have this series done by the end of the year. It's not done now, so I feel like I can't talk about it fairly. So Dragon Watch almost made the list, but it didn't because I decided to spare you guys an entire video that was just me talking about Brandon Mull books. I've limited myself to like one per author. I'm going to be going in order of reading, not in order of like favorite, because I really couldn't organize these in order of favorites. So we're just going to start back with like ones that I read towards the beginning of the year, and we're going to move on towards the most recent ones. I'm going to be kind of quick with the summaries, and I'm not going to get too into spoilers, just in the interest of making a video that Blue can actually watch the whole thing without having to skip around to avoid Beyonder spoilers. So that being said, my top 10 favorite books/series that I read this year. Starting off, Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. It's a take on the Baba Yaga folktale. It's about these two siblings, Bellatine and Isaac, who have kind of grown up estranged. They both have different magical abilities. For instance, Bellatine can bring like puppets and dead things to life, and Isaac can kind of shapeshift. They've been apart for years and they're kind of embittered toward each other, but when some distant relative dies and bequeaths them something that they find out is actually the Baba Yaga house, you know, the one with the chicken legs, they decide to work together to put on like a magical puppet show around the United States and like earn money and stuff for what they want. Then they end up being pursued by this guy called the Long Shadow Man, who's like trying to eradicate their history in the house and has pursued like their family all the way from Eastern Europe. So they have to figure out how to defeat him. The writing was beautiful. When I was trying to think of like favorite books I had read this year, Thistlefoot was like top of my list because I'm never going to forget how good that writing was. I loved every minute of it. It felt so whimsical, but also so, I don't even know how to describe it. The narration style is so cool. A lot of it is Baba Yaga's house. I feel like there's a name for this house and I've forgotten it because it has been at least 10 months since I've read this book, but it stuck out to me and it has this wonderful commentary on stories and their power and how they can influence history. It was incredible. 10 of 10. Absolutely recommend this book. After that would be The Deadlands by Benjamin Percy, and this is a book that I would not ever have picked up under normal circumstances. In my creative writing class, we were reading a collection of essays by Benjamin Percy called Thrill Me, and he mentioned his book, The Deadlands, within this anthology of essays, and I was like, okay, I'm intrigued, and so I went to check it out. It is a post-apocalyptic retelling of the story of Lewis and Clark. And I know that sounds like absolutely absurd, and it is, but it works. So for anyone who doesn't know, Lewis and Clark essentially were like these two guys who went on an exploration of like the American Midwest and West and stuff. This is taking place in like a world where the voyage of Lewis and Clark never happened. It's unclear. It's like a modern world that has been completely devastated by this new strain of like the flu. One of like the last human sanctuaries is the city of St. Louis. So Louis Merriweather and I don't remember her name, but she's Clark. They decide to go on a mission out west to see if they can find more people who are alive. And like Louis has magical abilities. It has something to do with like radiation poisoning, I think. Again, it has been a hot minute since I read this book. I probably should have like looked up the plots to better summarize these to you, but I'm going off vibes. They set out across like the post-apocalyptic wasteland of America to discover if there's anybody else who has not died from the flu, basically. It is so weirdly good. I don't like post-apocalyptic things. I would normally not go in for this, but it is such an interesting reimagining of something that I never would have expected somebody to reimagine. Like, who looks at Lewis and Clark and goes, I want to write that as a post-apocalyptic story with like radiation-based powers? It's absolutely wild. And I really like his writing style. The end, I'm like not 100% sold on, but I really enjoyed the book enough that like it stands out to me even now. And next would be The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. This is not fiction. This is historical nonfiction. So it's a biographical account of all of these women in the 20th century who worked for radium companies, and radium is a highly radioactive substance that causes severe problems and like radium sickness and can kill you. But all of these girls were working completely unprotected in radium factories back in the day because they were marketing it as like completely safe and not bad for you at all. They were actively encouraged to do procedures that ended up being completely harmful to all of these women. So this is like an account of what happened to all of them and their subsequent court battles, their historic implications for workers' rights that were going on in the 20th century. I really don't know how to summarize it better than that. It is absolutely heartbreaking to read. It's like horrifying to know what happened to these women and what they went through and how little the companies cared. It's not surprising, but it is abjectly terrifying to read. Kate Moore did an incredible job assembling all of this history and writing about it and humanizing these people. I read this book in, I want to say, a day or two. I couldn't put it down. I was gripped the whole time I was reading it. You just feel so much sympathy for these women and what they went through, and it's like incredible to read about the influence that these cases of theirs had and like how their fight for their rights and like the influence that has had on workers' rights and safety regulations today. I really, really recommend it. I'm never going to be able to like forget this book. I can't get it out of my head. Next up would be the Peter and the Starcatcher series by Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson. I have briefly mentioned this series. This is a reread. I read this series when I was growing up. I was really, really big into it. I've mentioned it before on this channel, but not in the sense of like summarizing these books. I do want to say in this case, I'm actually kind of singling out a very specific book. I want to talk about Peter and the Sword of Mercy, which is book 4, and I believe the best of the series. So this is a Peter Pan retelling slash reimagining. It's basically the origin story for Peter Pan that is very different from the original Peter Pan mythos. It's different but similar. There's like a group of orphans. Peter's one of them. They're on this boat. They're going to this country called Rundoon where they're going to be slaves. On board the ship, which is called the Neverland, there is a mysterious chest with a magical substance in it. They discover it's called Star Stuff. It falls from the sky. It's like got magical properties. It can make you fly, be able to do other things. It depends. There's like pirates, Blackstash who eventually becomes Hook. There's like an origin story for all the mermaids and they shipwreck on an island. Peter becomes exposed to a massive amount of star stuff and becomes what we know as Peter Pan. It like stops his aging, it gives him the permanent ability to fly, all that stuff. That's like the first book, and then the other books are about the people who are like fighting against the Starcatchers, trying to take over the world, yada yada yada. Well, anyway, the first 3 books are about Peter and Molly Astor. Well, then Molly grows up and marries George Darling. So book 4, Sword of Mercy, is about her daughter Wendy Darling. So this is like years later, and the others have come back, and the really, really creepy shadow dude, Lord Umbra, he's come back. They're trying to get some massive catch of like star stuff. The Starcatchers have basically disbanded. Wendy has to fly all the way to Neverland and get Peter to come help her. In the other books, you kind of get a glimpse of how sad it's going to be once Peter's friends grow up without him. These books are like Peter Pan as a study in grief and loss in a way that you would never think about otherwise, but it's beautiful and like devastated me when I was rereading them. I was rereading them and going, oh my god, this is a book series about grief. And I never realized, but that's what it is. You kind of get hints and glimpses of Molly is growing up. Molly is taller than Peter. Molly has interest in other things, and Peter is still the same person. He's stuck as the same person, and the Lost Boys are growing up, and he'll never be the same. But Sword of Mercy is the one that really punches it home. Bridge to Neverland, which is the 5th book, kind of does that too because it's set in modern times. But if you ask me, Sword of Mercy is worse because Peter gets to see how all of his friends, like the original group of Lost Boys, have all grown up, and Molly has grown up, and Molly has kids. They're all still there, but they're like almost unreachably distant because they're adults now, and he's still a kid. He's like grown kind of bitter. He gets more bitter, I think, and grief-stricken and withdrawn in Bridge to Neverland. But in this, you kind of see the beginnings of how he is like understanding that he can't get attached to people who don't like live on Neverland because they're all gonna grow up and leave him behind and he's just stuck, and it's rough. So Sword of Mercy does that even better than the other ones, and it's brutal in some ways. First off, there's like this new villain in it called like the Skeleton, and he scares the life out of me. Between him and Umbra, this book traumatized me when I was a kid. It's just really good. Wendy as a character, I really enjoy what this book does with Wendy, and like her and Peter fascinate me. They weren't really romantic either, but they fascinate me as a dynamic. I feel like I'm doing a really bad job of summarizing Peter and the Starcatchers to you, but it is so good. Just a really fresh take on a lot of the Peter Pan stuff. It definitely has its problems. Book 3, Peter and the Secret of Rundoon, is bad. It's the worst of the series. It's very Orientalist. It has brown face. It's just not good. But Sword of Mercy is incredible, unbelievably depressing in some ways, really, really well done, and it haunts me to this day. Next up, we have Babel by R.F. Kuang. Again, this is another one that I can't even like begin to summarize this to you. This book is like 600 or 800 pages. It was a lot of pages. It's about this boy, Robin, who is orphaned as a kid, and he's taken from his home in Canton by a British professor and raised in England. Then he attends Oxford. This is like it's a historical fantasy. So this is like an alternate universe where Britain has learned how to harness the power of language and silver and use it for magic. Oxford has like the Translation Institute, Babel. They are using the power of language in order to power Britain. It's a story about colonialism and language and discovering like who you are. It's absolutely brutal at points. I was so upset reading this book. It is an absolutely incredible book. My friend recommended it. They were like, okay, I need some of you to read this book. And I was like, okay, I'll read the book. And me and a couple other friends read it, and I just... wow. R.F. Kuang does an incredible job talking about language. It made me think about languages in ways that I had never thought about them before. Like the untranslatable aspect of a lot of languages, how there's not like a one-to-one translation and things will not match perfectly. The bond between some of these characters, there's like a core group of characters, and their bond is so good and so heartbreaking. And like the way it ends, the way this book ends, I have not gotten over it. It has been months, and I'm still thinking about how Babel ended. This book, I don't want to spoil it for you, but like, you should read this book. Next is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Now, I should mention, I am not a Hunger Games fan. I read The Hunger Games when I was a teenager. I reread it recently so I could read the prequel because, you know, the movie was coming out. I really liked this prequel. I think it is my favorite of the 4 Hunger Games books. It is so well written. I think it's difficult to create a prequel and have it be a good prequel but also a good story, because it needs to be both. When you're writing a prequel for something, you don't have the kind of freedom that you do when you're writing a series or even a sequel. You have to create the setup for a world that people already know, and you have to do it in a way that makes sense and it's enjoyable as a story as well, because if you're just making a prequel and the prequel doesn't stand really on its own, it's not a good story. Songbirds and Snakes was a fantastic prequel and a really well-written story, to the point where I enjoyed it, again, more than the original trilogy. For anybody who doesn't know, it's a prequel to The Hunger Games, obviously, and it tells the story of the 10th annual games. It's kind of like the origin story for President Snow and how he ended up the way he did. And I thought it was masterfully done in the sense that, like, you know where this guy is headed, and you can see very clearly how he became what he became throughout the course of the book as it goes on. It's one of those, you know, this is always going to happen, she's been dead since the beginning scenarios. And it is just so cool how it lays the foundation and the groundwork for a lot of things that come afterwards. You can see the seeds being planted that will lead to the Hunger Games universe as we know it in the trilogy. It was expertly crafted. It was really, really well done. I don't like Hunger Games for some reason. It's not my cup of tea, but Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was phenomenal. I read the whole book in a day. I did not put that book down. I still haven't seen the movie. I'm gonna watch it eventually. Then I read Beloved by Toni Morrison. I have been meaning to read this book for so long. I committed a cardinal sin. I watched the movie before I read the book. In this case, I was watching it because I was writing a paper about motherhood and horror cinema, and Beloved happened to be a very good subject for that. I have had the book for a good long while, and I've been looking at it on my shelf going, I need to read Beloved. Well, I finally read it this year. It's the story of a mother. So she lives in a house with her daughter, and she is haunted by the spirit of her other dead daughter, who she killed when she was a baby in order to prevent her from being taken by slavers who came for her when she escaped from slavery with her children years and years ago. I feel like I'm not prepared to talk about this. It is a beautiful book. It is a heart-wrenching book. The way Toni Morrison writes is like everything that I want to write like. Her use of language is like mind-boggling. It's on a whole other level. And the story is so heart-wrenching. It is this incredible story about love and loss and grief. You need to read this book. If you don't read anything else in this video, you should read Beloved. Next up is This is the Story of a Happy Marriage by Ann Patchett, which I have talked about in a previous video. We're getting into the territory of books that I've actually read in the last couple months. So This is the Story of a Happy Marriage is a collection of Ann Patchett's essays. Ann Patchett is a novelist. She is perhaps my favorite novelist to ever exist, but this is a collection of nonfiction that she's written over the years about writing and love and marriage and divorce and dogs and RVs. It's really, really good. Ann Patchett has such a way with words. Her writing, her essays, her novels, her short stories, they are so good. If you haven't read Ann Patchett, you should. Next is, of course, the Beyonders trilogy by Brandon Mull. If I had to pick a top favorite book that I read this year, I may have to give the award to Beyonders. This is a reread. If you guys have watched my other videos, you know that I read this series when I was a kid. It is a middle grade fantasy series, and I know you're all thinking, middle grade fantasy? That's your favorite thing you've read this year? How old are you? Shut up. It's good. Just because it's a kid's series doesn't mean it's not good. For those of you who have not heard the summary already, it's about these two children from Earth, Jason Walker and Rachel Woodruff, who find themselves in a magical world called Lyrian, and they've been summoned there in order to join the fight against Maldor, who is the last wizard in Lyrian who is becoming an emperor, and they're trying to defeat him. The trilogy tells the story of how they ultimately recruit all of these other people to their cause and work to defeat Maldor. This is a story about love and grief and baseball. I know that sounds absolutely absurd, but it's true. The characters are so strong, the dynamics are so good. It has its issues. I'm like reading it and I'm like, absolutely no 13-year-old would talk like Jason Walker. But I don't care because it's so good. The plot is constructed so well. The fantasy world is so vibrant and fascinating, and it has all of these really cool magical races and concepts and places like the Sunken Lands and the Drowned City and the Southern Jungles and the Inland Sea. It is such a fun fantasy world. I'm not even a fantasy person, but I love Beyonders. I love this series so much. And I've talked about Farron before, talked about Farron and Drake, I've talked about Farron and Jason's dynamic, I've talked about Rachel and Drake, but they're so good. They are just absolutely unbelievably unhinged dynamics. Farron's character development, one day I want to write a character as good as Farron, son of Baldur, and like his development. It haunts me. It is so good. This book series. This stupid trilogy and the ending. I will never get this ending out of my head. I've had a delightful time rereading Beyonders this year. It is so fun and whimsical and grief-stricken, and it made me cry several times. I love it. Number 10, I feel like if you watched last month's video, you're gonna see this one coming, but that would be Lockwood & Co., the series by Jonathan Stroud. Oh my god. Okay, so this is a middle grade / young adult series. It's set in an alternate universe where for the last 50 years, Britain has been plagued by like an epidemic of ghosts, and child psychic agents have to fight off the ghosts because they're the only ones who can sense them. So it's about the smallest agency in London, Lockwood & Co., as they kind of unravel the history and the mystery of the problem, and they try to solve all these conspiracies and black market rings and stuff. I'll keep this brief because I like ranted a whole lot in the last video about this, but the world building is incredible. I've been thinking about the world building since I read this series when I was like 14. I want to create a world that is this fascinating one day. Lucy's narration is so fun and snarky. The characters, the dynamics are phenomenal. Again, Haunted Skull, I love you. It is just an incredibly well-written book series, and I love it so much, and I think everybody needs to read it. So that is my list. my very poorly summarized list of my favorite books, not necessarily the best, but my favorite books of 2023. Of course, this could change in the next 2 weeks of the year. I could read some incredible books and change my mind, but as of right now, on Sunday, December 17th, that is how I feel. Those are my favorites that I've read. I guess this is the last time probably that I will be seeing you, or you'll be hearing from me this year, so I am going to see you all in 2024. And I hope that we've read many good books in 2023, and I hope we read many more good books in 2024. So, what's really funny is I've been reading all of Brandon Mull's other books, and like in his acknowledgments or like a note to readers in the back of the book, he's always like, oh, if you like this, you should read my other books. But like, he almost never mentions Beyonders. He's always like, you guys should go read Five Kingdoms or Candy Shop War. And I'm like, Brandon, Mr. Mull, Beyonders is your best work. I'm sorry to like other people who think Fablehaven is the best, and I love Fablehaven and it's great and all that, but Beyonders is the greatest thing that this man has written in my opinion, and I think everybody needs to read it, and we all need to sit down and talk about it now. Everybody come hold hands with me and let's talk about Beyonders. Please.